Okay, in this segment, we're going to talk about how to prepare surfaces. Now, this is something you're going to have to do a lot of the time. If you're painting in the street, most of the time you're just going to paint a wall and then that doesn't matter. If you paint canvases, same thing, you're just going to either work from directly onto the canvas that you bought, put some gesso or something, but there's not much to it. If, as a mural artist, most of the time you're going to come across bricks, wood, metal, plastic, and you kind of need to know what to do. Sometimes some of my friends call me and they're like, oh, I've got to paint a van, what do I do? So I'm going to try and explain I'm going to start with the rules. Like there are certain rules you have to follow and how to break some of them. And also I'm going to give you loads of different scenarios, like how do you paint wood or metal, or how do you paint a car, like real life scenarios. For that, I'm going to use tape. So I've got some taping and jointing. We've just done the segment on how to do filler. So this has got holes. So this will represent primer, because primer is like a diluted paint. Yellow is going to represent water-based paint, and black is going to represent oil-based paint. So the first rule of thumb is you can put water-based paint, and then you can put on top either oil-based paint or water-based paint. So this is your first layer, and then on top of that you can put water-based paint, 10 coats if you want, doesn't matter, it won't be affected, it'll be thick, but whatever. Or you can put oil-based paint, and then after that everything you're going to put is going to be oil-based paint. So I'm just going to put another one just for fun, and then I'm going to put another one here just to represent that you can do many different layers as long as you stay within oil-based paint or water-based paint. Now you can put oil-based paint on top of water-based paint, and that's not a problem. The problem is when you start to put water-based paint on top of oil-based paint. It's not going to work because oil uses a resin which is smooth, and if you're going to use a water-based paint which uses either PVA glue or acrylic or some other type of binding agent that they use, it's not going to stick to the oil-based paint. However, you can bypass that by sanding it. So say you've applied a second coat of oil-based paint and you let it dry for a full day. Oil-based paint takes about 12 to 16 hours to dry, depending where you live, if it's cold or hot. But once you've let the paint dry, you can sand it, give it a key, it's called, to make it rough. And after that, you can put whatever you want. Then you're back to, say you've sanded the oil-based paint, now you can go back to either putting oil-based paint or water-based paint, it doesn't matter. But if you apply another coat of oil-based paint, then you got to start again by sanding it and then so on. Now, a problem you're going to come across is you may watch this video or even go online or ask somebody, and then they will tell you pretty much the same thing I'm telling you. And then you'll go to a shop, you'll ask the shopkeeper or the sales assistant, and they'll tell you something totally different. And then now you don't know who to believe. If in doubt, it's best to believe the painter, or even go online, do a search and see what people are saying. People in shops, for the most part, they sell products. They don't use products. Some people will, but a lot of the time they will just read what it says on the tin, and then that's what they'll apply. It's a lot better to either try and experiment with paint. In my previous workshop, I mixed gouache with glue and put it underwater and let it dry and did all kind of experiments to see what would happen, and left it for days. I've painted in very cold and warm weather and all that. And after a while, you sort of realize some things that they say on the tin is true and some things they're not necessarily true. Obviously, they run a business. They want to sell, all types of different products. They want to sell this one before, this one after. Sometimes you need all of those products and sometimes you don't really. So when it comes to painting cars, if you're painting a van, a lot of the time it doesn't matter. If you're using spray cans, some people will ask you to paint a van with an airbrush. If somebody asks me, I will charge them between 10 and 20,000 pounds. If I'm doing a car, it's going to be, I don't know, between 7 to 10, 12,000 pounds, depending on the finish. But a lot of the time, people just want their van painted with cans and they don't want to pay anywhere near that. They'll pay maybe £1,000 or £2,000, and that's as far as they'll go. So in that case, wash the van with just normal soap and water. Do not put any wax, and then just go directly onto it. If you want to do an even better job, you can wash the van, then use a Scotch-Brite like this green one or a red one, and then just paint on top of the van. It's best to use something called a tack rag or tack cloth. You get that in automotive shops. They're just, it comes in a plastic bag, it's a cloth, and it's very tacky. It's got like some type of glue on it. And you can just rub the whole surface, and it will take all the fine dust that you would have created by sanding lightly. If you want to do a really good job, you can use a 400 sandpaper and again use those tack cloths or tack rags, and then that'll be an even better job. And then you just paint. Most of the time, if you're using spray cans, you're not going to bother doing a lacquer job, because a garage is probably going to charge about £2,000–3,000 to lacquer a van. So if you're doing a van, just clean it, maybe scuff it, and then use a can, and off you go. If you're painting a car, it's a bit different. You need to apply many different things. You need this, for example, which is called an adhesion promoter for the plastics. It's kind of it's a primer for plastics. You can get it from, this is Montana, German Montana cans. They do a plastic primer as well. On top of this, you can use another primer, or you can go directly with your paint. I'll go back to painting cars in metal and plastic in a minute. I just want to do the walls and the wood to start with, because that's mainly what you're going to be painting. It's very unlikely that you're going to be using spray cans on a car. Maybe somebody will ask you to, but the paint in a spray can is so thick, it's not the best job. An airbrush paint, and using an airbrush obviously is definitely what it's for. With an airbrush you get a much thinner coat, you can do the full artwork on a car, and then you finish with a lacquer and so on. I'll go with these steps at the end of this video. Okay, we're gonna start nice and easy with a plasterboard wall. So say somebody's done a new construction and they've put plasterboard, they've already filled the gaps and the screw holes and everything. It's ready to go. What do you do before you do the artwork? So first, you're gonna apply the primer. As a primer, you can buy something that says primer on it, or you could just use the paint that you're actually gonna use. If it's a paint that you've mixed, it'll be more expensive because they've had to take the time to mix it, or you could just use white because it's cheaper. And what you want to do is mix 50% water with your paint. So 50% paint, 50% water. So that's the primer. And after that, let's say we go with water-based paint. We're going to do one coat undiluted and another coat undiluted. If you want a really good result, and especially if you're using a vibrant color like magenta pink or a yellow or a black, anything that's either vibrant or that would show a lot of marks or anything like that, you could use 3 coats. And after that, you'll get something really good. You can just do your artwork. If the plasterboard, if the wall is like this, has already been primed and painted, then you can skip the primer and you can just do 2 coats of undiluted paint and you'll have a good result. If you're painting on bricks or blocks, breeze blocks outside, what you want to do is you can use a primer that's made for this. You got latex primer, or you could use PVA glue mixed with water, 50-50. So you can apply 1 coat of that. And afterwards, you can apply 2 coats of masonry paint. Some people will be biting my head off for saying that, because you're not really supposed to paint bricks. Bricks need to breathe. The moment you paint them, problem arise. Masonry paint is meant to be still breathable, but it's not really. So it's not as bad as oil-based paint, but still. If you're gonna paint bricks, use masonry paint on the outside. If it's inside, like here, just use your typical vinyl mat Actually, this is vinyl matte as well, just pink. This is, I made it gray now. You can use vinyl matte on the bricks and then it'll be fine. And it's the same if you're using, if you're painting on top of cement or concrete. You can use a latex primer or dilute a latex paint or emulsion paint, and then do 2 coats on top of that with masonry paint. And on the inside, use this. Don't use masonry paint on the inside of the house because it's got antifungal agents in there, and it's not good for us to breathe. So masonry paint, keep that outside. Okay, now we're going to talk about plastic. Say you're painting a car and you got a plastic bumper that hasn't been painted, like the typical gray bumper. What you want to do first is put an adhesion promoter. So you're going to do that. And what you do is you apply a thin coat, then you apply another thin coat, then you apply a thick coat. You have a flash off or waiting time of about 15 minutes in between coats. And after that, you can put another one. So this represents just the plastic primer, the adhesion promoter. You'll have 2 light coats or dust coats and 2 wet coats or thicker coats. Don't go too mad because otherwise it'll drip and it's not ideal. When you're applying the paint, you want to go as thick as you can without making it run. And this is just something that you'll have to learn with practice. It's not, some things can be taught, some things you just have to try, and it's trial and error. Quick thing, if you were to use a primer with a spray gun, in effect what you have in a spray gun is the paint or the primer or the lacquer, whatever, and then you'll have some thinner or some hardener. In the case of a varnish, this is varnish, but it's a lacquer. In the can, you have the varnish and the thinner. You've got some of those cans that have a button underneath, and you smash the button in, and inside you've got a little canister of hardener, and it mixes the lacquer with the hardener. You pierce by jamming the button. It's got like a red button. You pierce the little canister inside, and then the paint mixes, the lacquer mixes. And by doing that, I mean, the paint's only going to last about an hour, then it'll be hard, you can't use it. But that gives you a much better lacquer. These lacquers are great for like a quick thing, but if you want to paint a car, it's best to have a hardener and lacquer mixed. Now, the problem with using a can is in order for the paint to come out, they need to apply thinner and quite a bit of it. So when you apply the paint or the lacquer, it's going to appear wet, but a lot of that is going to be thinner. I don't know what type of thinner they use, but that thinner is going to evaporate just like water would, and then you're left with the lacquer and the hardener. If you were to use a spray gun, then you would only use a lacquer with the hardener, and that's what you'd apply. You may put a little bit of thinner, but nowhere near as much as what's in the can. So whenever you're using a can, you'll need a lot more than when you're using a spray gun. It'll appear that you've put loads, but by the time it dries, the thinner dries off, then you'll be like, oh, I need a lot more. So if you're gonna use a lacquer to cover a car or something, and you're gonna use cans as opposed to a spray gun, just know that you'll need quite a few of those, more than you actually think. By the way, this is a really good brand, WRX. The cap that comes on top of this is one of those calligraphy cap, and it gives you a fan or like a spray angle that's massive, and you really do a really good job. I really like this lacquer. But basically, when you're painting plastic, going back to that, you want to use an adhesion promoter like that. Then after that, you want to sand the wet coat, and you'll have to let it dry for about a day. You sand your wet coat, and then you can do your water-based artwork or cellulose-based artwork if you prefer. Then you don't have to sand it. So say that's the coat of artwork, and then on top of that you're going to do your lacquer. And when you're putting the lacquer, it's the same. You'll do a dust coat, another dust coat, and then it's actually not water-based, it'll be oil-based, cellulose-based. So you put 1, 2 wet coats of that. So you paint this, wait 15 minutes, this 15 minutes, this 15 minutes, this 15 to 30 minutes on the second wet coat, and then you definitely walk away and you just let it dry, either in the booth or naturally, and then you can work on it the next day. After that, you can sand your lacquer, and then you can apply more coats of lacquer, or you can apply a rubbing compound to make it glossy. It's basically the same with metal. It will be exactly the same steps that you'll have to take. But instead of an adhesion promoter, it'll be a metal primer that you can apply in a can or in a spray gun. And then the lacquer after the artwork will be the same. And last but not least, we're going to talk about an unprimed piece of wood, like just bare wood that's going to be outside. How to paint it the best way possible so it lasts for years. And what I'm thinking would be like an outdoor, like a door, somebody's front door, or more likely somebody will ask you to paint a shop front, like over the shop, they got a piece of wood, maybe it's unprimed, it's a piece of plywood. How do you paint it so it can last as long as possible? So this is a piece of wood that I've primed and then painted. I just used normal wall paint, vinyl matte, diluted it probably 50-50 with water, did one coat, and then after that just did a couple of coats of undiluted paint, off you go. For a shop front, using just oil-based paint would be a mistake. A lot of people would do it this way because that's what it says on the tin, but what it says on the tin is not always the best way to go. The great thing about using a water-based diluted paint onto an unpainted piece of wood is that it will soak into the wood, into the fibers of the wood, and there is no way oil-based paint penetrates as well as water does. So say if you were to use this paint and dilute it 70% water, 30% paint, so very watered down, and you were to do one coat on your panel, once it dries after like an hour, you can do a little bit less diluted, so 50% water, 50% paint, do another coat, and then after that you can paint whatever you want, because then the watered down paint will have penetrated the fibers of the wood so far, much more than oil-based would have done. You could use an eggshell or an undercoat paint and then put some white spirit to thin it down, but it won't penetrate anywhere as much. So that's what I would do if I was to do a job for somebody and they wanted to last a long time. I would use just a normal paint and do 2 diluted coats. After that, I would put 2 coats of eggshell. Eggshell is great because it's oil-based, but it's very easy to apply. You can also use water-based eggshell, which is nowhere near as good or resistant. It's very thick. It's okay. I don't love it. I just find oil-based eggshell is a really good product. Or you could do undercoat and then gloss. Whenever you use gloss, it's a thin paint, so you need to put quite a few coats, 2 to 3 coats. So 1 coat of undercoat and then 2 to 3 coats of gloss on top of your diluted paint that you've applied. And then after that, you're good to go. Another great reason to use water-based paints as a primer on your piece of wood is, for example, you want to use your acrylics or your house paints like these to do the artwork you're going to do on the shop front of your client. Then you can prepare this with 2 coats of diluted water-based paint. Then you can put 1 coat of undiluted house paint. And then after that, you can just do your artwork all good. And then on top of this, you can just apply a Yacht varnish, which is see-through. You can get some that are tinted, but you can get a Yacht varnish, or you could just get a normal varnish. However, and then you can apply 2 coats of varnish. However, if it's outside, I would recommend not using this because this would be too thin, especially if it's windy, you will struggle. The best thing would be to use a small roller and just apply a lacquer, a see-through or colorless lacquer on top of your water-based paint. You do 2 coats of that, so 1 coat, let it dry for a day, come back, do another coat. And then your panel will be very protected and it will last for years and the colors will be great. Okay, so to sum up, if you have a surface that's been painted before, like this panel or this, or anything that's been painted before, you can just apply your paint directly onto it. It's better to sand it, prepare it and paint it anyway, but you could just apply it like this. If it's something that's porous like this, or plasterboard that's unpainted, or some plaster, then you want to thin down your paint and then apply undiluted paint afterwards. If you do that, you'll get the best results. And then depending on how far you want to go, you can sand that paint and then apply more paint on top of it.